when you're using intents to solve user swaps, the speed is as fast as your solvers. So and solvers are paying directly to the user, and that achieves these fantastic speeds that Catalyst across or any protocol using intent will reach. So speed is really for user being paid.
Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of the Talking Intentionally podcast. Today, we're speaking with Alex, the co founder of Catalyst. Alex is a SICK developer, and he shares his thoughts on building a solver network, ERC 7683, and pivoting ideas with our founder, Ash. So, without further ado, enjoy the episode.
Everyone, this is Ash, founder of Axel, here with Alex from Catalyst. I've got a super exciting conversation coming up here, focused on all things agents and cross-chain swaps and intents. So I guess just to kick things off, Alex, if you want to give a super quick summary of Catalyst and then maybe how you guys got into the intents sort of space to begin with.
Yeah, so Catalyst has recently turned into a system where we have several different products that we have. The first product that we launched is essentially a long journey to generalize the cross-chain or constant function market maker even further. The idea was essentially to have two products, volatile product and a constant one, or like more of an amplified one, so that we could match different assets. You can replicate Uniswap or Balancer through it, but the mathematics to actually facilitate it is quite complex. So we recently announced a new product called Crosscats, which is an intent-based system to go between different chains. It's way more scalable. Instead of being several thousand lines of code, it's only 650. And this really allows us to utilize intents to get the best advantages that it can offer, like cheap swaps if they aren't disputed, fast swaps because we can pay directly to the user and then verify it afterwards. And then again, as I previously said, it's very short. It's only 650 lines of code for the minimum implementation.
I think that's the part that really stands out to people. And like in my head, like from a super philosophical level, like this stuff is so cool because it's almost like you're outsourcing this task that needs to be done to a solver. And as a result, you don't have to write all this code and do all the burden of actually like making the swap work or writing the AMM or whatever it might be. But I guess on that note, what's the hardest part that you guys have encountered so far? So like 7683 is this cool standard that was being piloted by Uniswap X and across. And we've seen a lot of sort of like pitches for people to start using this more. So curious if there was challenges with integrating that or building off of that or anything else when you think about this switch from a regular model towards an intent-based model for the protocol.
I mean, the protocol to standardize the interface of how solvers interact isn't that difficult to interface. We did have two problems with it. If you can also see if you go to the docs, essentially it's very EVM focused. So the addresses are only 20 bytes, even though a lot of other chains use 32 or even larger. A lot can be boiled down to 32. And this presents a problem when we go to LVMs because these 20 bytes doesn't work when you want to send an intent from, for example, Base to Solana, where you need the 32 bytes to encode the address. But apart from these, we made minor modifications. We just made sure that if you cast the actual our intent into another solver system, the casting bytes still match, and they will be presented with a understandable intent.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The standard itself seems usable. I guess in my head, when I think about, especially for these longer tail ecosystems, so to speak, like these all VMs where maybe there's like less liquidity compared to EVM chains, like fewer folks that are moving funds around. How challenging is it to onboard solvers or to get like solvers to start like using Catalyst to begin with? Because you look at something like Uniswap X, you have Wintermute, you have a couple other folks, pretty much an oligopoly. Across also has issues, and they're amazing folks with a massive team, and they have issues onboarding solvers because of that being difficult. Do you guys have issues there on that front?
Yes, so this is the cold start problem. We haven't launched Crosscats yet, and it's hard to launch without a solver, and it's hard to get a solver on board without being launched and having volume. So that is the one thing that we have been really fighting with. That we found a few good, very nice solvers that want to work with us. And we're trying to essentially do everything we can to help them get onboarded. We have a person that's working with them to make sure everything is good on their side, and we essentially have a person that's always available to help them if they have any questions or the integration provides some problems. There's also, the additional aspect that we are Bitcoin protocol. So normal solvers are a lot of, EVM with ERC20 tokens. So how does the Bitcoin aspect work into that solver infra?
Yeah, no, that's a super good point. And I know the docs talk a lot about like just the technical differences as well. Like you can't easily have permissions for moving ERC20s around. There has to be an actual like UTXO or transaction that kind of goes through on that front. I guess let's just dive into the fun stuff of the architecture in a little bit more detail. So like I'm coming at this from like a Uniswap X is kind of the immediate gold standard of how people have started to talk about this intent-based cross-chain swap architecture. For you guys, like one thing that caught my eye, and I would love for you to highlight as many other things as there are out there, is this underwriting concept for solvers. So instead of a solver, like there's a permit to signature that goes through for somebody being allowed to move a user's funds under certain conditions. Solver does it, and then at that point, they maybe get the input token on the origin chain for fulfilling that transaction. For you guys, if like a solver just can't do it, or if somebody else wants to go and almost buy out a solver to go and finish doing this transaction, they can do that. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that, the reasoning behind that, and just other fun differences, I guess, from a Uniswap X style architecture?
Yeah. So our architecture is very similar, though we have a few differences because we are LVM focused. So the whole idea is essentially to make it as small as possible. So we chopped it up into a lot of different bricks that can be assembled in the way you want. So essentially you have an initial system that you can then scale and add features to. One of the features you can add is what we call underwriting. That's not it's a native part of the protocol, and that it's integrated, but it's an add-on that you can easily remove if a system doesn't need it or if it's needed in some other places. One of the advantages underwriting gives is, for example, if the user want to go from Bitcoin to USDC on Base. In that case, we have to wait until we can unlock the funds inside the reactor for the finalization to happen. We use a Bitcoin SPV client. We cannot use only one confirmation. We need at least two, if not three or more. There's like a header mining issue with SPV clients where you can essentially try to approve invalid transaction by continuously mining a block header or like a block lead. And that needs to require multiple confirmations. That means that the wait for users is actually quite long on the Bitcoin to USDC side, since it's a reverse intent. So the user is actually the solver and the solver is the user. And that means that we need to have a way to accelerate it for users, and that's what we use underwriting for. Underwriting in the actual code implementations is just called purchase order. So if you're a solver and you initiate a transaction on our reactor, you are set as the owner of the input assets. And then it's expected that you fulfill the output of the transaction. And then an underwriter can see that you've now fulfilled the output. They can purchase the order from you, so you get immediate payout. And now it's the underwriter's problem to prove and gets the input tokens. There's a small discount given to the underwriter, so they get a small fee of the inputs, and that's set by the solver. And that essentially allows solvers to have much higher money velocity, which is also a big differentiator from us. But essentially, you can see the transaction immediately on the other chain. The proof may take 30 minutes to arrive or 60 minutes to actually arrive for the sufficient confirmations. And an underwriter essentially freeing that up in like 5 minutes or 1 minute. That is a huge unlock for solvers. They don't have to log as many funds into our protocol to actually accelerate the protocol and solve large swaps.
Yeah, it's extremely clever. Like it's such a like simple philosophical, but I'm sure hard to implement kind of add on to this that just makes the UX much more streamlined. On that note, and I'll hype up across like a little bit over here. Like I think what they've done super well is this, like you see these things on Twitter of like sub 1 second bridge times or like as fast as possible, despite just using, let's say, like UMA optimistic oracles under the hood, which maybe have a 4 to 6 hour verification time period before you have guarantees. And that's assuming that there's no dispute that arises. So if we talk verification a little bit, and I know the docs cover this a little bit, like optimistic versus a proof that is generated versus something else. What are you guys doing at Catalyst? Where do you see like strong verification moving towards? Are we just going to have an optimistic future because people don't care that much and things like underwriting make UX fast enough? Or will we just see like zero knowledge proofs that are ran for like every single solver related transaction?
Yeah, it's a really good observation about how the space is moving. Regarding the time aspect, essentially, when you're using intents to solve user swaps, the speed is as fast as your solvers. So solvers are paying directly to the user, and that achieves these fantastic speeds that Catalyst across or any protocol using intent will reach. So speed is really for user being paid, not that big of a problem anymore, except if they're doing what we just talked about, the reverse thing. Regarding the verification aspect, optimistic has so many advantages that over strict verification. For example, the Bitcoin SPV client on Base, it's kind of negligible the cost to actually update it. Actually, proving the transactions is significantly more expensive. And if we just had a small amount of transactions had to be proven every single day, the cost to prove these transactions would very, very quickly be larger than the cost to actually update the SPV clients. And I see that's not the goal. The goal is to make it cheap for the user. And optimistic verification is a much easier path to achieve that, since that doesn't require any state changes to actually see. It just requires waiting until some period has been passed. And in case of an SPV client, it's incredibly easy to dispute a challenge if the payout has actually been reached, or like prove it happened and then collect the collateral from the challenger. So I do think we're going to go in an optimistic future, simply because you already have the speed of the intent, and you then just need to reduce all of the underlying cost, and optimistic is just the best way to do that.
I love the take and the focus on like user preferences here. I feel like it's very like there is this narrative of like cheaper proofs, like things will theoretically get way faster and better. So then why not do a proof for anything? But like I think from this just user experience level, optimistic is working. It'll keep working down the line, even in a world where proofs are much better. You could almost have like optimistic and then a proof that follows and things are totally good, whatever. But cool. Just to wrap up, like where do you see very high level generic question? So feel free to take this however you want. Where do you see intents going? Because today you see a lot of things focused on like swaps, cross-chain swaps with 7683. Obviously, Axel is biased, but I view this stuff as moving towards like any task on chain. Theoretically, any task on the internet that is verifiable in some capacity through Optimistic or ZK can be outsourced through intents to solvers, and then you can have this sort of like order flow auction to verification style flow for these. But in your opinion, where do you see intents going? What does it look like when intents win, so to speak?
I also see a high intent future. I just think that there's such a much better movement away from AMMs. I know there's been a lot of discussion about the capital locks. I mean, I'm coming from the swap perspective of intent right here, because the solvers simply have to, not lock, but like kind of log in that they need to have the funds available on every single chain to facilitate swaps of a certain size. The same argument in an MM context, I think, is almost identical. So I don't see, the actual fighting power of that argument. But there are some disadvantages of intents that, centralized exchanges solve. So having settlement layers of chains, Everclear for an example of that, do have some advantages over intents. But intent can also be built as the quick way under, essentially the infrastructure that runs everything, and then you have some kind of settlement layer for solvers to then rebalance and optimize these positions on all of the chains. So I do see intents as being the future, because they simply have so many advantages. The only disadvantages I would say is in the long tail assets, because not a lot of solvers have those assets. And that's where potentially some capital sharing or protocols that facilitate that, or just traditional AMMs, do have an advantage over intents.
Oh yeah. Well, thanks so much, Alex. Like super good conversation. Cool to dive into like a lot of this like intense architecture stuff, and excited to see what Catalyst does going forward.
Thank you.